The morning started like any other on Nexus Prime. The great crystal towers of the Galactic Council stretched toward the purple sky, their surfaces reflecting the light of 3 suns. Inside the main chamber, delegates from 73 different worlds gathered for what they thought would be another routine session about trade routes and mining rights. Ambassador Jake Morrison stood at his usual podium, his dark blue uniform crisp and professional. For 3 years he had represented humanity in these halls, speaking for the 4 billion humans scattered across council space. The other delegates had grown used to his presence, just as they had grown used to human ships patrolling their borders and human soldiers fighting their battles. Jake looked around the chamber one last time. The tall, crystal-like Vorthek delegates sat in their cooling chairs, their bodies shimmering in the artificial light. The small, furry Quillan representatives huddled together in their environmental suits, chattering quietly among themselves. The Nexari floated in their antigrav pods, their translucent forms pulsing with different colors to show their emotions. All of them trusted humanity to keep them safe. All of them took it for granted. Jake activated his communication device and spoke clearly into the recorder. His words would reach every council world within minutes, broadcast through the quantum network that humanity had helped build and maintain. "Citizens of the Galactic Council," he began, his voice steady and calm. "By the time you hear this message, humanity will have withdrawn from all treaties, agreements, and partnerships with your organization. Effective immediately, all human personnel, equipment, and vessels are leaving council space. We will not return. Do not attempt to follow us or contact us again." The message was simple and direct. Jake did not explain why humanity was leaving. He did not list grievances or demand apologies. He simply stated facts, as humans often did when they had made up their minds about something important. 20,000 light-years away, Captain Lisa Grant received the signal aboard her battlecruiser Defiance. The massive ship hung in space above the mining world of Kepler-7, where her crew had been protecting a convoy of Quillan freighters from pirate attacks. The little furry aliens had been grateful for the protection, bringing gifts of their famous honey cakes to the human crew. Lisa read the withdrawal order twice, then handed it to her second-in-command. Commander Rick Stone scanned the document quickly, his face showing no emotion. Both officers had been expecting this order for weeks, ever since the secret meetings had begun on New Terra. "All ships, this is Defiance Actual," Lisa announced over the fleet communication channel. "Execute Protocol 7 immediately. Repeat, execute Protocol 7. Across the system, human vessels began powering up their hyperdrives. The massive cargo ships that supplied council outposts started loading their equipment. The patrol boats that kept pirates away from shipping lanes formed up in departure formations. The research stations that studied dangerous phenomena in the outer systems began shutting down their experiments. The Quillan convoy captain tried to contact the Defiance, his high-pitched voice crackling through the translator. "Human friends, where are you going? The shipping lane is not secure without your protection." Lisa did not answer. Her orders were clear about maintaining communication silence during the withdrawal. Instead, she watched as the last human transport cleared the system's edge and jumped to hyperspace. Then the Defiance followed, leaving the Quillan freighters alone in space for the first time in 2 years, on the fortress world of Gamma Station. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Brooks supervised the evacuation of Firebase Omega. The base had guarded the dangerous Void Sector for 20 years, its sensors watching for threats that emerged from the lawless regions beyond council space. The massive defensive guns that could destroy entire fleets sat silent as her teams removed the targeting computers and fire control systems. The nearby alien colonies had sent dozens of messages asking what was happening. The Nexari settlement on Gamma 3 wanted to know if the early warning network would still function. The Vorthek military outpost on Gamma 5 demanded answers about who would monitor the sector boundaries. Amy ignored all of them as she sealed the last equipment containers. Her communications officer, Sergeant Don Parker, approached with a worried expression. "Colonel, the alien settlements are getting pretty nervous. Their defense coordinators keep asking when we'll be back." Amy looked at the tactical display showing the positions of all the nearby alien colonies. Small, peaceful settlements that depended on human protection to survive in this dangerous region of space. "We won't be back, Sergeant." "They're on their own now." The withdrawal happened faster than anyone thought possible. Humanity had been planning this moment for months, secretly preparing their new homeworld and organizing the logistics of moving 4 billion people. Every human ship, every human base, every human research station had received the same orders at exactly the same time. Dr. Patricia Hughes watched the evacuation from the bridge of the science vessel Discovery. She had been studying dark matter formations in the Helix Nebula when the orders came through. Now she was overseeing the destruction of 3 years of research as her team deleted files and destroyed equipment that could be useful to other species. The aliens had always assumed. They understood human technology because they could use it. They never realized that humans had deliberately kept the most advanced systems secret, sharing only what was necessary for cooperation. The real weapons, the real defenses, the real scientific discoveries remained human secrets. Back on Nexus Prime, the council delegates sat in stunned silence as they realized what had happened. In less than 72 hours, humanity had vanished from their civilization completely. No human remained in council space. No human ship patrolled their borders. No human soldiers stood guard at their outposts. Admiral Zaleth of the Vorthek fleet tried to contact the human embassy, but found only empty rooms and disconnected communication systems. The humans had even taken their furniture with them. Council Chair Thyman called an emergency session, but without human translators. Several species could not communicate properly with each other. The first reports came within hours. Pirate signals detected in the Outer Rim territories. Distress calls from isolated colonies. Equipment failures at unmanned monitoring stations. The careful network of security that humanity had maintained was already beginning to unravel. President Robert Cole stood in his office on New Terra, reading the final reports from the evacuation. Every human had been successfully relocated to their new homeworld, or one of the colony ships heading for unexplored regions of the galaxy. They had left behind a civilization that had grown soft and dependent, protected for so long that they had forgotten how to protect themselves. The aliens would learn soon enough what it meant to stand alone in a dangerous galaxy. Humanity had tried to teach them, but some lessons could only be learned through experience. The humans had left without a word because they knew their former allies would not understand until it was too late. 3 months passed before the first attack came. The Galactic Council had spent those months trying to understand why humanity had left so suddenly. They sent diplomatic messages to every known human colony, but received no replies. They offered trade deals and territorial concessions, but the silence from human space remained complete. Admiral Zeleth stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the patrol routes that human ships used to follow. The Vorthik commander had always been proud of his crystalline people's military traditions, but he had to admit that human tactics were effective. Their ships moved differently than alien vessels, striking fast and hard before disappearing again. Now his own crews had to learn those same patterns without human guidance. The first sign of trouble came from the Void Sector, where Firebase Omega had once stood guard. A small research station reported strange signals coming from the dark regions beyond council space. The signals were coded transmissions between pirate groups that had been quiet for years. The station commander, a nervous Quillan scientist named Pip, sent increasingly worried messages to the council fleet. Pip had worked alongside human researchers for 2 years before the withdrawal. He remembered how the humans would frown at their sensor readings and quietly increased security patrols when certain signal patterns appeared. Now, those same patterns were showing up again, but Pip did not know what they meant. The human early warning protocols were locked in encrypted files that no alien could access. The Bloodfang pirates struck without warning on a cold Tuesday morning. Their fleet emerged from hyperspace near the mining colony of New Prosperity, where 3,000 Nixari workers extracted rare crystals from the planet's core. The colony had been peaceful for 5 years, protected by regular human patrols that kept criminals away from the valuable mining operations. Vex. Kramath stood on the bridge of his command ship, watching the defenseless colony through his ship's view screen. The scarred pirate leader had spent 3 years in a council prison, captured by human forces during a raid on a civilian transport. He had watched human interrogators work, learning their methods and studying their weaknesses. Now he was free, and the humans were gone? The colony's defense coordinator was a young Nexari named Shimmering Light, who had never seen actual combat. She tried to activate the automated defense systems that humans had installed around the colony, but the weapons required human authorization codes that she did not possess. The massive railguns that could destroy approaching ships remained silent as the pirate fleet closed in. Shimmering Light sent a desperate message to the nearest council patrol, but the response came too late. Admiral Zeleth's ships were 3 hours away, following the old human patrol schedules that covered too much territory with too few vessels. The humans had made it look easy, but they had been using classified jump coordinates and advanced sensor networks that the council did not understand. The battle lasted less than an hour. The Bloodfang pirates used simple but effective tactics, overwhelming the colony's weak shields with concentrated firepower. They did not try to capture the settlement intact, as humans might have done. Instead, they destroyed everything they could not steal, leaving the crystal mines flooded and the residential domes shattered. When Admiral Zelith's fleet finally arrived, they found only wreckage and silence. 3,000 Nixari workers were dead, and the pirates had vanished back into the void. The council commander studied the battle recordings, trying to understand how the attackers had moved so efficiently. The pirate ships were old and crude compared to council vessels, but they had fought with a viciousness that surprised the civilized aliens. The news of New Prosperity's destruction spread quickly through council space. Other colonies began requesting additional protection, but the council military was already stretched thin without human reinforcements. The careful security network that had kept the peace for years was falling apart as alien commanders tried to cover the same territory with half the ships. On the industrial world of Forge Prime, Factory Supervisor Delta 9 received reports of increased criminal activity in the nearby systems. The massive Nexari had overseen weapons production for the Council fleet, working with human engineers to develop new defensive technologies. Now the human technical advisors were gone, and the weapon designs required human authorization to manufacture. Delta 9 tried to contact the human embassy for the access codes, but found only empty buildings and disconnected communication lines. The weapons factories sat idle while pirate attacks increased across the sector. The irony was not lost on the Nexari supervisor that they could not build the weapons. They needed to defend themselves because the humans who helped design them had disappeared. The second major attack came 2 weeks later. The Crimson Horde, a group of machine-worshipping fanatics from the galaxy's edge, emerged from hiding to raid the technology centers of the inner worlds. Their modified ships, half biological and half mechanical, struck at the research stations where aliens had been trying to reverse engineer human equipment. Commander John Harrison read the intelligence reports from his office on New Terra, where humanity's new government was slowly taking shape. The former council officer had spent years fighting alongside alien allies, learning their strengths and weaknesses through countless joint operations. Now he watched from a distance as those same allies struggled against enemies they did not understand. The Crimson Horde used tactics that the council military had never encountered. Their ships could repair themselves during battle, using nanotechnology that humans had helped contain years ago. Their weapons fired living projectiles that adapted to enemy defenses. Their commanders followed no logical strategy, striking randomly and retreating before counterattacks could be organized. Admiral Zelith lost 6 ships in the first engagement with the Horde, his formations scattered by attacks that came from impossible angles. The aliens had learned human battle tactics by watching and copying, but they had never understood the thinking behind those tactics. They fought like humans without possessing human instincts for warfare. The reports kept coming in, each one worse than the last. pirate raids in the Outer Rim, terrorist attacks on civilian targets, criminal organizations emerging from hiding to challenge weakened council forces. The careful balance of power that humans had maintained was crumbling as enemies realized that their greatest opponents were gone. Dr. Patricia Hughes studied the situation from her new laboratory on New Terra, analyzing the intelligence data that human spy networks still collected from council space. The deterioration was happening faster than even the worst human projections had predicted. The aliens were learning that maintaining galactic peace required more than good intentions and advanced technology. President Robert Cole called his first cabinet meeting to discuss the growing crisis. The human leadership had known this would happen when they made the decision to withdraw. The question now was whether to intervene before the situation became completely hopeless or to let their former allies learn the hard way what protection really cost. 6 months after humanity's departure, the situation had become desperate. Council Chair Thyman sat in his private office, staring at casualty reports that grew longer each day. The proud confederation that had once governed half the galaxy was losing entire sectors to criminal organizations and terrorist groups. What had started as scattered pirate raids had grown into coordinated attacks against the very foundations of galactic civilization. The breaking point came when the Shadowkin Syndicate emerged from the dark regions beyond map space. These masters of psychological warfare had been contained for decades through human mental conditioning programs and specialized counterintelligence operations. Now they struck at the heart of Council territory, targeting not military installations but the minds of civilian populations. Admiral Zeleth received the first reports from the Nexari, homeworld of Crystal Prime, the beautiful planet known for its singing towers and peaceful crystal gardens, had become a nightmare of paranoia and fear. The Shadowkin used advanced psychological techniques to turn neighbors against each other, spreading madness through carefully crafted propaganda broadcasts that exploited each species' deepest fears. The Nexari, who communicated through color changes in their translucent bodies, found themselves unable to trust the emotional signals of their own kind. Families broke apart as parents could not tell if their children's colors showed love or deception. The crystal cities that had taken centuries to grow began to crack as their builders lost the cooperative spirit needed to maintain them. Captain John Harrison monitored the crisis from his new position with Human Intelligence Services on New Terra. The veteran officer had spent years learning Shadowkin tactics during the long war that humans had fought to contain them. He knew that the aliens were using modified versions of techniques that had once driven human colonies to madness. Before proper countermeasures were developed, the humans had defeated the Shadowkin through a combination of advanced psychology, genetic resistance treatments, and brutal direct action when necessary. The alien species lacked both the mental conditioning to resist Shadowkin influence and the willingness to use the harsh methods needed to stop them. The Council's peaceful nature, once their greatest strength in diplomacy, had become their greatest weakness in warfare. Dr. Patricia Hughes studied the intelligence reports with growing concern. The Shadowkin attacks were not random acts of terrorism, but part of a larger strategy to destabilize Council space completely. Each attack targeted specific psychological weaknesses in different alien species, suggesting that the Shadowkin had been studying their enemies for years while hiding in the dark regions. The Quillen, homeworld of Greenfields, suffered the worst attack. The small, furry aliens were naturally trusting creatures who lived in large family groups and made decisions through community consensus. The Shadowkin exploited this by spreading false information about food contamination, causing the Quillen to turn against their own food production systems and begin starving themselves. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had once worked with Quillen researchers on agricultural projects, learning about their social structures and psychological patterns. From her new laboratory on New Terra, she watched helplessly as an entire civilization tore itself apart through manufactured fear. The Quillen did not have the individualistic thinking patterns that allowed humans to resist group manipulation techniques. The Council military tried to respond to the Shadowkin threat, but found themselves fighting an enemy they could not understand. Traditional weapons were useless against psychological attacks that turned entire populations into weapons against themselves. Admiral Zeleth ordered his fleets to attack suspected Shadowkin bases, but the enemy had learned from human tactics and never stayed in one place long enough to be caught. The Crimson Horde took advantage of the chaos to launch their own massive offensive. While Council forces struggled with the Shadowkin crisis, the machine-worshipping fanatics struck at industrial centers across 12 systems. Their biomechanical ships could repair themselves faster than Council weapons could damage them, and their living weapons adapted to each new defense. General Kevin Murphy read the battle reports from his office in the Human Defense Ministry. The former Council officer had helped design many of the defensive strategies that aliens were now trying to use against the Horde. He could see the mistakes in their tactics, the gaps in their formations, the timing errors that allowed enemy forces to exploit weaknesses. The humans had contained the Crimson Horde through a careful combination of biological warfare, electromagnetic pulse weapons, and coordinated strikes against their reproduction facilities. The Council forces lacked both the specialized equipment and the ruthless determination needed to fight an enemy that could literally evolve during battle. The industrial world of Forge Prime fell after a 3-day siege. Delta 9, the Nexari factory supervisor, sent a final transmission before the planetary communication grid went dark. The massive alien had tried to organize a defense using modified construction equipment, but the makeshift weapons were no match for Horde bioships that could adapt to any attack pattern. President Robert Cole received urgent communications from desperate Council leaders who had finally swallowed their pride enough to beg for help. Council Chair Thymon's message was particularly pathetic, offering humanity complete autonomy within Council space in exchange for military assistance. The alien leader had finally realized that his civilization was dying without human protection. The messages went unanswered, not from cruelty but from policy. The human leadership had made a collective decision to let their former allies learn the true cost of galactic peace. Admiral Susan Clark argued that early intervention would only teach the aliens to depend on humanity again without understanding why that dependence was dangerous. The Plague Cult chose this moment of maximum chaos to reveal themselves. The bioterrorists, who had been contained through human biological warfare expertise, began releasing modified viruses on civilian populations. Their weapons were specifically designed to target the genetic weaknesses of different alien species, causing death rates that varied from world to world. Got the Vorthak crystalline homeworld of Prism suffered a 90% casualty rate when the Plague Cult released a virus that caused their crystal bodies to shatter from within. The beautiful beings who had once been so proud of their military traditions found themselves literally falling apart as their own biology turned against them. Their rigid social structure collapsed as survivors could not maintain the precise temperature controls needed for their crystal cities. Dr. Hughes reviewed the biological weapon samples that human spy networks had obtained. The Plague Cult had clearly been studying alien biology for years, developing targeted diseases that exploited each species' unique vulnerabilities. The humans had stopped them before through aggressive prevention programs and direct strikes. Against their research facilities, the Council's attempts to fight the disease outbreaks failed completely. They lacked the biological warfare expertise that humans had developed over centuries of fighting similar threats. Their medical systems were designed for treating normal diseases, not engineered plagues that evolve faster than treatments could be developed. As the galaxy burned around them, the human leadership finally understood the true scope of what they had done. They had not simply withdrawn protection from their allies. They had removed the only force capable of maintaining order. In a universe full of ancient enemies who had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. 1 year after humanity's departure, the Galactic Council was dying. What had once been a proud confederation of 73 worlds was now reduced to a handful of survivors, hiding in fortified bunkers while chaos consumed the galaxy around them. The great crystal towers of Nexus Prime stood empty and dark, their surfaces cracked from Shadowkin, psychological attacks that had driven the maintenance crews insane. Colonel Frank Williams led a covert reconnaissance team through the ruins of what had once been the Council's proudest achievement. The human special forces officer moved carefully through the abandoned corridors, documenting the extent of the destruction for the leadership back on New Terra. His mission was simple but dangerous. Find out if anything worth saving remained of galactic civilization. The Nexari homeworld of Crystal Prime had become a graveyard of broken dreams. The singing towers that had once filled the air with beautiful harmonies now stood silent and fractured. Frank's team found thousands of crystal bodies scattered through the city streets, their translucent forms shattered by the psychological warfare that had turned neighbors into enemies. A few survivors huddled in underground shelters, too traumatized to emerge into the light. Frank had served alongside Nexari soldiers during the border conflicts before humanity's withdrawal. He remembered their courage and their artistic nature, the way they could create beauty even in the middle of warfare. Now their civilization lay in ruins because they had never learned to defend against an enemy that attacked the mind instead of the body. The Quillen homeworld of Greenfields told an even sadder story. The small, furry aliens had always been peaceful creatures who solved problems through community cooperation. The Shadowkin had destroyed that cooperation by spreading fear about contaminated food supplies, causing entire villages to turn against their own farmers and food distributors. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell walked through empty Quillen settlements where grass grew through the floors of abandoned homes. The agricultural paradise that had once fed dozens of worlds was now covered in weeds and wild growth. Millions of Quillen had starved to death rather than trust their own food production systems, victims of psychological manipulation they could not understand or resist. Sarah had worked on agricultural projects with these same communities just 2 years ago. The Quillen farmers had been eager to learn human techniques for increasing crop yields and resisting plant diseases. They had never imagined that their enemies would attack their food supply through their own minds rather than through weapons or biological agents. The industrial centers told stories of economic collapse and technological regression. The great factories of Forge Prime sat cold and empty. Their production lines stopped when the workers fled or died. Without human technical expertise, the aliens could not maintain the complex systems that had supported their civilization for centuries. Merrill Henry Jackson received the final communication from his former colleague Admiral Zeleth. The proud Vorthok commander had once dismissed human military methods as crude and brutal, preferring his own species' elegant crystal formations and precise tactical doctrines. Now he begged for any assistance humanity might provide. His voice broken by months of constant defeat, Zeleth's message painted a picture of complete military collapse. His once mighty fleet of 300 vessels was reduced to 12 damaged ships hiding in a nebula near the galactic core. The survivors under his command were starving because their supply lines had been cut by pirate raids and terrorist attacks. The crystal cities of his homeworld were cracking as the precise temperature controls failed without proper maintenance. The Vorthak had always prided themselves on their military traditions and tactical excellence. They had studied human warfare methods but never understood the psychological foundation that made those methods effective. When faced with enemies who ignored conventional rules of engagement, their rigid doctrines became weaknesses rather than strengths. Dr. Patricia Hughes analyzed the intelligence reports from her laboratory on New Terra. The patterns were clear and terrifying. Each alien species was being destroyed by attacks that targeted their specific psychological and biological weaknesses. The Shadowkin exploited fear and paranoia. The Crimson Horde used technological adaptation. The Plague Cult employed targeted biological weapons. The most disturbing discovery came from intercepted Plague Cult communications. The bioterrorists had developed a new weapon that went beyond attacking individual species. They called it the Final Solution, an engineered virus designed to eliminate all oxygen-breathing life in the galaxy within 50 years. The weapon would spread through space itself, carried by cosmic dust and solar winds. Hughes ran the calculations 3 times before accepting the results. Even humanity's isolated colonies would eventually fall victim to this planetary-scale genocide. The plague cult had learned from their previous defeats at human hands and created a weapon too large to contain through conventional methods. The threat had evolved beyond simple territorial disputes into an existential crisis for all intelligent life. President Robert Cole convened an emergency meeting of the Human Strategic Council. The debate was fierce and emotional as leaders argued about whether humanity should intervene in the galactic crisis. General Kevin Murphy believed that their former allies had finally learned their lesson and would never again take human protection for granted. Secretary of Defense Rachel Adams disagreed strongly. She argued that allowing genocide to continue would make humanity complicit in the deaths of billions of innocent beings. The aliens had been foolish and dependent, but they did not deserve to die for their mistakes. More importantly, the new threats were growing beyond anything that had existed before humanity's withdrawal. Admiral Susan Clark presented the military assessment that would ultimately decide humanity's course of action. The enemy forces had grown stronger and more coordinated during the Year of Chaos. They were no longer the scattered criminal groups that humans had once contained through regular patrols and targeted strikes. They had evolved into existential threats that could potentially challenge even human military supremacy. The Shadowkin had perfected psychological weapons that could drive entire populations insane. The Crimson Horde had developed biomechanical ships that could adapt to any known weapon system. The Plague Cult had created diseases that could spread across interstellar distances. Each enemy had used the chaos following humanity's departure to grow beyond their previous limitations. Cole listened to all the arguments before making his decision. Humanity had left without a word because no words could have conveyed the depth of their former allies' dependence on human protection. The Council had paid in blood because some lessons could only be learned through loss. But now the threats had grown beyond punishment into genuine danger for all life in the galaxy. The choice was no longer between teaching lessons and maintaining peace. It was between allowing universal genocide and risking everything to save civilizations that had never appreciated what they had lost until it was too late. The decision came at dawn on New Terra. President Robert Cole stood before the assembled Human Strategic Council and spoke the words that would change the galaxy forever. Operation Redemption was authorized, not to save the ungrateful aliens who had taken humanity for granted, but to prevent the complete extinction of all intelligent life in the universe. The Plague Cult's final solution had forced humanity's hand. Dr. Patricia Hughes had confirmed that the bioweapon would eventually reach even the most isolated human colonies, spreading through cosmic dust and solar radiation until every oxygen-breathing world became a tomb. The threat was too large to ignore and too dangerous to face without eliminating its source completely. Admiral Susan Clark received her orders while standing on the bridge of the battleship Vengeance, humanity's most advanced warship. The vessel had been built in secret during the months following the withdrawal, incorporating all the lessons learned from watching alien civilizations crumble. Its weapons could level continents, and its shields could withstand star-level radiation. The fleet that assembled at the edge of human space was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 200 ships of various sizes formed attack formations that had been perfected through decades of warfare. Each vessel carried weapons and defensive systems that were years ahead of anything the aliens had ever imagined. The humans had not been idle during their year of isolation. Captain Lisa Grant commanded the First Strike Force, assigned to eliminate the Plague Cult's primary research facilities in the Omega sector. Her ship Defiance had been upgraded with biological warfare countermeasures and sterilization systems designed to cleanse entire worlds if necessary. The mission was simple: find every Plague Cult installation and destroy it completely. The attack began without warning across 17 sectors simultaneously. Human ships emerged from hyperspace with perfect timing, their movements coordinated through quantum communication networks that aliens could not detect or jam. The enemies who had grown bold during humanity's absence suddenly found themselves facing the full weight of human military evolution. Lisa's task force struck the Plague Cult's stronghold on DK Prime like a hammer blow. The bioterrorists had fortified the dead world with living defenses that could adapt to most weapon types. But human engineers had spent months developing countermeasures. The organic shields that had stopped Council fleets dissolved under focused particle beams designed specifically to disrupt their molecular structure. The battle lasted only 3 hours. Lisa watched through her ship's viewscreen as the plague cult's laboratories burned in the toxic atmosphere of their fortress world. Every research facility, every bioweapon stockpile, every sample of the final solution virus was reduced to sterile ash by weapons that left nothing alive at the molecular level. Commander Rick Stone led the assault on the Bloodfang Pirates' main base in the Vega system. The criminals who had terrorized defenseless colonies for months found themselves facing human tactics that had evolved far beyond what they remembered. Their crude ships and brutal methods were no match for precision strikes that eliminated their leadership and shattered their morale within minutes. Vex Krameth, the scarred pirate leader who had boasted of making the galaxy pay for his years in prison, died when his command ship was vaporized by a single shot from Stone's destroyer. The Bloodfang fleet scattered in panic as human fighters hunted them through the asteroid fields where they had once hidden safely. The Crimson Horde met their end in the industrial systems they had conquered. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Brooks commanded ground forces that landed on factory worlds and engaged the biomechanical fanatics in close combat. The Horde's adaptive technology was impressive, but humans had developed weapons that evolved faster than living tissue could mutate. Amy led her troops through the corrupted factories where the Horde had been building their hybrid ships. The biomechanical abominations that had terrorized Council fleets fell apart under assault rifles that fired ammunition designed to disrupt both organic and mechanical systems simultaneously. The machine-worshipping fanatics discovered that their gods could bleed and die. Like any other enemy, the final battle took place in the dark regions beyond mapped space, where the Shadowkin Syndicate had built their psychological warfare centers. Admiral Henry Jackson personally commanded the assault force that penetrated the sector where few sane beings dared to travel. The Shadowkin had filled the region with mind-bending illusions and reality distortions that had driven many explorers insane. Human soldiers advanced through the nightmare landscape wearing mental conditioning equipment that had been perfected during decades of fighting psychological warfare. The Shadowkin's most powerful weapons simply bounced off minds that had been trained to resist any form of mental manipulation. Their illusions and fear projections were useless against troops who understood exactly how psychological attacks functioned. The Shadowkin leadership died in their command center on Madness Station, still trying to broadcast terror waves that no longer affected their enemies. Jackson watched as his demolition teams planted charges that would destroy the station and everything it contained. The masters of psychological warfare had finally met opponents whose minds they could not touch. In the aftermath of the human offensive, rescue ships emerged from hyperspace to evacuate the surviving Council worlds. The few aliens who had lived through the year of chaos watched in amazement as human medical teams and engineers began the process of rebuilding their shattered civilizations. The galaxy would be restored, but under very different terms than BEFORE. Dr. Sarah Mitchell supervised the rehabilitation of the Quillen homeworld, working with the traumatized survivors to rebuild their agricultural systems. The small aliens looked at their human rescuers with a mixture of gratitude and fear, finally understanding what they had lost when humanity departed. They would never again take protection for granted. Colonel Frank Williams oversaw the reconstruction of Nexus Prime, where the few surviving Council delegates gathered to draft new agreements with humanity. The aliens who had once dismissed human methods as crude and brutal now competed to offer humanity whatever terms they desired for continued protection. President Cole received the final reports while standing in his office on New Terra. The galaxy had been saved from extinction, but at a cost that both humans and aliens would remember forever. The enemies that had emerged during humanity's absence were gone, eliminated with an efficiency that demonstrated just how much human military capability had grown during their isolation. The new treaties were simple and direct. Humanity would protect galactic civilization, but on human terms and with human methods. The aliens would provide resources and cooperation, but they would never again dictate how their protection was provided. The galaxy had learned that peace required more than good intentions and advanced technology. The humans had left without a word, because no words could have taught the lesson that experience provided. The Council had paid in blood because some truths could only be learned through loss. Now the galaxy would rebuild with a new understanding of the delicate balance between civilization and chaos, and the terrible price of taking protection for granted.